Well, sir, as if commanding a nuclear submarine isn't a ton of responsibility, I can only imagine what it felt like carrying the nuclear football for the President of the United States. How did you manage to bear it along with some of your other career responsibilities? Because to me, it feels rather bone crushing. So talk to us about that.
Before I start, how did I get that job? And I get asked this a lot. How did a guy, average Joe from Western New York who grew on a farm, how did you become the selection for the submarine force to even go interview for this and then get picked amongst the other 6 other candidates from other naval?
Please do tell.
Well, I tell you, the secret is it wasn't me. It wasn't my capability. It wasn't my tactical. It wasn't my charisma. You'll see, I'm not Tom Cruise looking. But what I did is based on 50 years of evidence-based research. I built relationships. When you make people feel valued and build relationships, and it's not $5 gift cards, it's not pizza parties.
Although those don't hurt.
It doesn't. I unleashed the full potential of everyone on board. So when it came time to say who should go interview for this job, the guy that was always the front and always had the #1 submarine, they didn't pick me because of me. They picked me because how I influenced success and others around me. So going to the football, yes, this was incredible responsibility. I was directly responsible for enabling the president to enact Armageddon. But what I experienced there at the White House is that President Bush, that's why he called me Navy Bob. I'm not recommending you give everyone a nickname, but by that fact, he built relationships. There's pictures of me swimming in his creek with him. I would brief him the morning of when we were going to the surge. I saw him in a human person. And so if the President of the United States, with that responsibility, can build relationships, any CMO can build that relationship. So that's what I found out about carrying the nuclear codes.
Hello and welcome to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the Chief Medical Officer. I am your host, Lee Scheinbart, and along with the fabulous team at the CMO Group, we bring you the most crucial conversations in healthcare and physician leadership. The CMO Group is the only physician-run and physician-led organization focused on chief medical officers and exists to transform how physicians lead. The group helps CMOs and emerging physician leaders move from expert operators to enterprise leaders through a unique transformational process. Healthcare doesn't just need good doctors in leadership, it needs high-powered executives with deep medical knowledge. That transformation is the work of the CMO Group. Today's guest is Robert Bob Ronska, also known as Navy Bob. Bob grew up in a small town in western New York and one day found himself as commanding officer of the USS Texas, a Virginia-class fast-attack nuclear submarine. Under his leadership, the Texas earned the Best Performing Ship Award in the squadron and had the highest personnel retention and lowest attrition for 2 consecutive years in the Pacific Fleet. Later in his career, Bob served as the Pacific Fleet's top fast-attack submarine commodore, in charge of Los Angeles-class nuclear submarines and responsible for over 1,700 personnel with assets and budget exceeding $25 billion, and executing numerous unprecedented missions vital to national security. While serving as the naval aide to the president during his career, he earned the nickname Navy Bob from the 43rd President George W. Bush. Responsible for the safety of the office of the president, Bob handled some of the most sensitive and vital national security programs while also carrying the nuclear football, the briefcase containing the nuclear launch codes of the United States. After 28 years of distinguished naval service, Bob retired as captain and then turned his leadership capabilities towards Central Florida. In 2018, Bob was invited to serve at Advent Health as Executive Director of High Reliability, while at the same time pursuing his Doctor of Business at Rollins College Crummer School of Business. Since then, Bob has been teaching at the University of Central Florida, where he delivers instruction on leadership and healthcare quality. author of the best-selling books Beyond the Sea, Leading with Love from the Nuclear Navy to the White House, and Healthcare, as well as the book High Reliability Healthcare, Applying the Secrets of the Nuclear Navy to Save Patient Lives, in which Navy Bob offers a comprehensive look into the leadership philosophy rooted in compassion and trust and based on the principles of the leader-member exchange. Well, Bob, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Lee. And it's such an honor to be on this podcast with you. And I've met so many chief medical officers. They are just amazing and such incredible leaders to pay this forward. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. We're going to get into healthcare in a few minutes, and we can talk more about what it's like to work with chief medical officers. But let's start at the beginning. So, as I recall, you and I both grew up in a similar time and in similar towns off of Lake Erie at a time when industries in the Great Lakes were actually beginning to have a bit of a decline. But we were both blessed by the type of people around us that cared more about us and what mattered to us than perhaps what was happening around them. And for you, the first such individual that you mentioned in your book, aside from your own father, were your football coaches. And one of those, Coach Gibbons, used a phrase that really hit home with me and impacted with you at the time, and you still use it to this day. What was that phrase, and why has that stuck with you for so long?
So it was Coach Gibbons, and Coach Gibbons inspired me to be better than myself. Always looking to improve. He wasn't just a football coach. He built relationships because he was concerned about me as a person and professional development. Sure, he was there to win, but that quote that stuck with me today, it just permeated, was he used to always say, either you get better or you get worse. You don't stay the same, which means if you do nothing, you're going to get worse. So you need to always strive to get better. And that's what I did.
You built a powerful relationship with the coach and other members of the team. That also stuck with you for years, didn't it?
Absolutely. And so you look back on time, what leaders do you remember? Do you remember those leaders that, was the title, the CEO, or they had all this money? No, you remember those leaders that built that relationship in you. They cared about you. And those are the leaders that will be legendary.
I agree. I think that relationship building, and we'll get into this a little bit more with the podcast, is critical to your leadership capability. If you attempt to lead without relationships, it's a little delusional at times. And if you have relationships but you don't lead them, you get a little stagnant, back to the point that things don't change very much. So I love that background. And then after high school, you and I took off for parts unknown. We didn't know each other, but compared to our schoolmates, we did something rather different, each of us. I went off to the seminary, and you went off to the New York Maritime School, potentially to be part of the Merchant Marine, as I recall. How did your time at the Maritime influence your maturity and later your leadership development?
So, other than my father teaching me about relationships and agape, um, basically sacrificially of giving of oneself, that unconditional love, I also learned that you can have this same type of environment at a institution. And one of the things at this institution at SUNY Maritime was they used to have this one hand. So we would go overseas with the entire school. And if anyone got in trouble and you heard one hand, you basically came running. And what it,
Bob, that's a phrase that somebody would say, one hand?
one hand, we was instilled in us. And basically you as a family, if someone's in trouble, you come running. And what that instilled in us is that it's not about you as a leader. It is not you and what you can gain on others. You are part of a collective team that you are here to support each other. And that's where I first learned this in the professional environment.
I think there's an ancient Buddhist phrase, what is the sound of one hand clapping? And without a partner, a buddy, a colleague, you don't generate much of anything in the one-handed clap. Does that resonate at all?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And you could see this with leaders, that some leaders think, and we'll get into Dr. Grain's work, the number one sided relationship theory, is that the leaders think that they have to have all the answers, tell people what to do, micromanage everything. those leaders are far putting a limit on their ability. But when those leaders reach out and bring out the best, your greatest engine are your people. And so the more you can instill that engine, and how do you get that engine bigger? You look at your people and you motivate them. And a motivated person, a person that feels care, will do 1,000 times more for you than if they didn't feel cared for.
Yeah, well put. And working with physician leaders, one of the things we talk to them about is don't always go it alone, even though you've been trained to do it that way. Let's look around. Let's build some reliability in our relationships. That will build reliability in our output. And doctors are quick to try to make that diagnosis and come up with the immediate answer. And outside of a clinical conundrum, that's not always the best way to use your leadership. It works in some instances, but not all. Well, after all of that, you were there at the Maritime, as I recall from the book, and you made a very life-changing decision for you. Upon graduation, you decided to join the Navy, specifically the Nuclear Propulsion's Officer Candidate Program, a decision that clearly changed your life forever. It could go back in time and tell the listeners how you arrived at that decision.
So I don't want to say that I make life-changing decisions off of a movie, but the movie The Hunt for Red October was released about a year earlier, and I love going behind enemy lines and seeing the camaraderie. And so, long story short, is that in the nuclear Navy, they only take 1/3 of the candidates from the Naval Academy because there's simply just not enough qualified engineering students to be able to come out of the nuclear Navy or the Naval Academy. So they have to go out to other commissioning sources such as ROTC and this other program called the Nuclear Propulsion Officer Candidate. So they asked me to apply for this. I was hesitant. My mind was set on merchant marine. But then when I went down to see a submarine, it wasn't about the money. That same feeling of friendship, the same feeling of belonging I felt when I toured a nuclear submarine. That is what did it for me. And that's why I joined the nuclear Navy.
Would you say that it was more of a feeling or an emotion, more so than a bunch of thoughts, or a combination?
So I would say it was definitely a feeling because how they recruited me was this recruiter came in not knowing anything about the program. And immediately that recruiter came in and say that you can get this amount of money by signing up. This is how much money if you meet this milestone. This is the amount of money you can when you retire. You'll be set for life. I turned off. I mean, like it was, I didn't care about money. And it was like trying to sell me oceanfront property in North Dakota.
Except this was sub-ocean front.
Yeah. And so my only reason I went to go see this program is because my roommate just kept on me because he was also invited. And so it was a free trip. So I went to go see it. But what changed my mind was this camaraderie. It was this family feeling. And that is what sold me. So it wasn't a thought, it was a feeling.
Yeah. And many physicians, as you know, along with your fellow officers, do align themselves with those inner feelings that are hard to describe, hard to articulate. And that's why a lot of times we end up in our chosen field, and it's specifically when we choose a profession like military service or healthcare. And it's hard to explain to people why that happens to us, but I did want to get into that a little bit. So thank you for sharing because it's a personal thing. Well, so there you are serving in the Navy after going through that school and that program. And as I understood, you're a submariner, as I think that's the way it's said. And a rising officer, and you learned a great many things about how not to lead as well as how to lead better. You also pointed out in your book that disorganization among a crew correlates with the level of dysfunction of that team, of that crew. And as you took command of the USS Texas, you saw firsthand what apathy and dysfunction looks like and feels like amongst the crew. So tell our listeners a little bit about something called Crew Top 3 as a means to reset a dysfunctional culture.
So I'll keep this as brief as possible because I could talk about this for the next 15 minutes. So When I went to the Texas, we were supposed to take this ship, new class of ship underneath the North Pole and certified for Arctic operations, the Virginia class. It was a second ship, brand new, and we were at Groton, Connecticut. And I relieved at the end of July, and we were supposed to get underneath the ice by September 20th, literally 2.5 months. And the pressure was incredible, because if we didn't get under the ice by September 20th, the ice would have been so thick that we couldn't have done it to get out the other side to go to Hawaii. And so not only you had time pressures, but I was experiencing shortly after I relieved this game called whack-a-mole. I'm sure that we all experienced it, where you didn't know when the next incident would happen, but the frequency was like whack-a-mole. I could not predict it, but I was so reactive because I would just go to the scene of the crime or the incident over and over again. And it got to the point where it was a breaking point where we had a significant incident equivalent to like a code 15 in the healthcare industry. And my boss, my Commodore at the time, came down, and I was in command, just got there about 3 weeks. And he starts poking me in the chest, telling me how messed up I am, how incompetent I am.
You.
Me. And he says, you're a disgrace to the Naval, you're a disgrace to the Virginia class program. You're a disgrace to the Navy. Normal leaders would have that roll downhill. I didn't. In the book, I talked about how I had great leaders that led in a caring and loving way. But I looked myself in the mirror and I said to myself, this whack-a-mole is not common in the nuclear Navy. This is not some unique situation. There's something going on with the culture and the crew. And the first place I started was to look at myself. What resources am I not giving? What training am I not providing? Or what culture am I setting where we get this apathetic setting? So I did this something simple that I had from another commanding officer, was the crew top 3. I went in my stateroom after just getting yelled at by my Commodore, saying I'm going to look at everything. And I went in my stateroom, opened up Microsoft Word. I put name at the top with an underline, put 1, 2, 3. And I printed out 160 for each crew member, mustered them topside. I said, men, crew, I need to know what your top 3 concerns are. I love you. I care for you. I need to know what your barriers are. I did not mention one thing about the incident. And I went down to my stateroom. About an hour later, I got a stack of issues like this. And I got sick to my stomach. Things I had no idea, even though I interviewed every single person on the crew. One of those things was they didn't have sufficient number of computers. Half the computers on this ship was broken. And this is something out of Star Trek. And what that entailed was about 2 hours per crew member had to stay on board, not because there was more work to do, but because of the computers, they had to stick around and wait around, and 2 hours per day was wasted just because they didn't have computers, that they couldn't be home with their families. The light bulb went off. I said, no wonder why we're having all these issues. Because the crew doesn't care for the ship. Why doesn't the crew care for the ship? Because the ship doesn't care for them. This is where the apathy started. So I immediately got new computers, went out there that afternoon. 2 hours later, we mustered back topside, and I said, I am so sorry. I love you. I care for you. I had no idea that we didn't have these computers, and this will never happen again. I continued the crew top 3 every month. And about 3 months into it, while we're at the North Pole, if I look back, that was the inflection point. The inflection point was the crew no longer was fearful of making a mistake to get in trouble. They were fearful of making a mistake because they didn't want to let anyone else down in the family. And that's why we became the number 1 ship in the squadron. And we had the lowest turnover in the Pacific Fleet for 2 consecutive years in a row, eye-watering missions. And I continued the crew top 3 every month. And anyone on this listen, you can adopt the crew top 3. And I did it every month. And the stack went from this to this to this to this. And there was one thing that was the one thing I was about to relieve 3 years later. And I was about to go up to do the change of command. And I forgot because it was so routine. I see one comment with the crew top 3. And that comment, I'll never forget it. It says, Captain, my only crew top 3, and there's one, is that I wish there was more variety of a hot sauce on the cruise mess. And I said, if you get that's their thing. That is the crew top 3. But we're going to talk about LMX, building relationships, and why this actually works, this practical thing, and how it's based on 50 years of academic research. I didn't know it at the time.
So one of the beauties of this show is it's a leadership lesson disguised as a podcast. And we're going to draw a lot of those lessons out right now before we go much further. So the whack-a-mole, do you know why we call this the Fire Chief Podcast? Because most CMOs, chief medical officers, become a fire chief. Most of the time, they're a firefighter putting out fires all day, every day. And then one day they say, you're now the chief medical officer, so you are the fire chief of the house. And it is very hard for the new CMO to understand that they will always be fighting fires until they do something, if not identical to what you did, something very similar. The second piece of that is the higher you go in your leadership, the farther away from the bedside that you are.
Yeah.
And you don't know what's going on day to day, minute by minute. Now, many of our officers do still have a clinical practice, but as you rise up in a bigger organization, it's incompatible to have both. And so the higher you go, the farther away from that work. And if you don't inquire by making rounds or asking people what it's like, you won't know what their problems are. And to identify, the system doesn't care about us, so why should we care? And they're going home working on computers, on outdated electronic records, no additional support for them. And it's so similar to everything you just described. And at the end of the day, if you can build a safety framework around, tell me what's the matter, and I'll do my best to lower that barrier. And if the most important thing is the type of hot sauce, you have made an incredible accomplishment in how you work and who you work with and how they work with you. But the single most important thing that I heard out of this piece right now was when there was trouble and your boss looked at you and put it on you, you looked at yourself. What don't I have, or don't I know, or what am I missing? Any of those questions. And that incredible self-awareness of maybe I am responsible. And if I am responsible, in what way and what do I do about it? Instead of letting it roll downhill so often is the case. So again, thank you for a wonderful story. Any comments before we move to the next question?
No, and I see this all the time, is that I empathize with the new CMOs to be so reactive. I looked in the mirror when I got poked in the chest, and I was fearful of not only, my career, but the safety of the crew. And I looked in the mirror and I said, what am I doing? What is there an escape? Is there an easy path out of here? And I empathize, and it is so difficult. And I will tell you that it's consistency. And how do you build consistency? You have to align those values with behaviors in your day-to-day practices. And if you don't do that, it's like going to the gym. You say, I want to get in shape. And you go to the gym once, you're not going to be able to get in shape unless you have a dedicated training plan. And there's no leadership training plan until now.
Yeah, leadership training plan. That's part of the work of the CMO group for sure. Well, sir, as if commanding a nuclear submarine isn't a ton of responsibility, I can only imagine what it felt like carrying the nuclear football for the President of the United States. How did you manage to bear it along with some of your other career responsibilities? Because to me, it feels rather bone crushing. So talk to us about that.
So it was faith. And but before I start, how did I get that job? And I get asked this a lot. How did a guy, average Joe, from Western New York, who grew on a farm, how did you become the selection for the submarine force to even go interview for this, and then get picked amongst the other 6 other candidates from other naval?
Please do tell.
Well, I tell you, the secret is it wasn't me. It wasn't my capability. It wasn't my tactical. It wasn't my charisma. You'll see, I'm not Tom Cruise looking. But what I did is exactly what I call it in the book, and it's based on 50 years of evidence-based research. I built relationships. when you make people feel valued and build relationships, and it's not $5 gift cards, it's not pizza parties.
Although those don't hurt.
It doesn't, but you got to make sure that so it does. But what I did is I built authentic, caring relationships, and I talk about that in the book. I unleashed the full potential of everyone on board. So when it came time to say who should go interview for this job, the guy that was always the front and always had the #1 submarine, they didn't pick me because of me. They picked me because how I influenced success and others around me. And I guarantee you, if you lead with the stick, the fear, you're going to see some results, but you'll never get to the results that could ever come close if you lead in a caring way in building relationships. And the thing I'd like to add before we go to the football is that some think that leading this way is a sign of weakness. It is not. Once I knew that the expectations were clear after I looked myself in the mirror and there was somebody that didn't follow the expectations, there was swift accountability. Because when you don't hold someone accountable after they know exactly what is expected and they have the proper resources and the culture is there, then it is not leading with care or love because they are hurting the rest of the team. And so this myth that this is a sign of weakness, I couldn't disagree more. So going to the football, if you look at the population that was lost during World War II, it was about 70 million people, about 2.8% of the population. If you ever seen the movie on Netflix called House of Dynamite, it's scarily replication of what would happen if we get incoming nuclear weapons. And approximately 90% of humanity would be gone, 7 billion if the full Armageddon. So yes, this was incredible responsibility. I was directly responsible for enabling the president to enact Armageddon. And so what gave me the strength? Knowing that deterrence since World War II, we haven't had anywhere near the casualties since World War II. That deterrence was causing that. So that gave me comfort to know that. But what I experienced there at the White House is that President Bush, that's why he called me Navy Bob. I'm not recommending you give everyone a nickname. But by that fact, he built relationships. There's pictures of me swimming in his creek with him. I would brief him the morning of when we were going to the surge. I saw him in a human person. And so if the president of the United States, with that responsibility, can build relationships, any CMO can build that relationship. So that's what I found out about carrying the nuclear codes.
I think bone crushing is therefore an understatement. You had my full attention when you described everything about nuclear deterrence and our strategy to maintain our position in the world, to maintain peace and not to see that level of destruction. And I've shared with you my experiences during COVID, which, at least in my small world, felt an immense amount of responsibility for the community in which I served. And I know chief medical officers feel that because I talk to them all of the time. They too feel responsible. So whether it's 8 billion people on the planet or 100,000 people in your community, the feeling is still very powerful. Now, I would submit to you also, you threw out another leadership lesson that I will give to my listeners relative to career management. The most valuable thing you can bring to an interview or to your career management, as with many things, it's always opportunities to move along in one's career. How other people speak about you is perhaps one of the most important ways to advance yourself, whether you're seeking advancement or not. As in your case, you were not seeking that responsibility, but you were open when people brought it to you. And clearly people had been talking about you. And that is what we call sponsorship. It is very helpful to have a sponsor who's talking about you when you're not in the room and telling things about you, about your character, about your capability, about how you hold people accountable, how you raise people up. I would never dismiss the value of a sponsor, but the value is based on how you behave and how people then talk about you. I see you're smiling. Any comments there?
Exactly. And so it goes back to relationships. That sponsor wants to support you because you built a relationship. It's not because you were the top of the class.
Right.
It wasn't because, it was because you did things that built a relationship with that sponsor. And in my book, I talk about what are those things that you can do to build that sponsorship.
So before we get into some of that building, let's hear, how did you end up in healthcare of all things?
So, great question. And I'll try to keep this short. When I was a commanding officer and Commodore, uh, I knew I was not fulfilling my life's purpose. I was doing it well, but there was something drawing me away. And I spent 8 years of my life underwater of the 28 years, not consecutively, thank God. So also my daughter would have gone to 3 different high schools, when I would have continued on where I got out. And I didn't want to do that to her or the family. So I started looking to see, is there other things out there than the nuclear Navy? So I reached out to Dr. Coleman, who was the physician to the president, and he co-authored the second book, Secrets of the High Reliability. And we became good friends when I carried the nuclear codes. We kept in touch. And he was the chief quality and safety officer at Advent Health. And I said, Doc, do you know anybody? Because he lived in the Orlando area, and I was stationed here at Nuclear Power Training Command. I said, do you know anybody at Northrop Grumman or Lockheed Martin that you play golf with? And he says, why don't you come work for the hospital? And I thought he was crazy. I said, I have no clinical background. He says, you're high reliability. He says, the nuclear Navy is, by Forbes standards, the highest reliable organization to ever exist. And for 75 years, you've never had a reactor accident. And you got 20-year-old sailors operating these highly enriched nuclear reactors. The same bullets that are in these nuclear reactors is the same fuel that was in Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and Fukushima. And yet you have never had a reactor accident. And what was even more remarkable is that he put the first submarine to sea in 5 years, but it was the culture that he changed. And that's what we talk about in that second book. So that's how I got into healthcare. And I did it for 5 years. And I was there during COVID, and the doctors and what they went through, and exactly was similar of me taking command of the submarine. And this was during COVID. If you think about the modern day heroes, they are our modern day heroes. Seeing them go into a COVID floor, not knowing what your enemy is, not having the PPE, and yet still going into that, at least when you go, I'm not downplaying what, soldiers do, but they know their enemy. They know their capabilities. You weren't protected, and you went in here not knowing. So that's how I got into healthcare. And for 5 years, I was over their patient safety and also culture across all of Advent Health. And I got to see the cultures and the real differences between the nuclear Navy and healthcare.
There are very few professions. In general, there are very few professions, and there are even fewer where the stakes couldn't be any higher, both in military life and in healthcare. And you could even argue the clergy, because your spiritual stakes are often very, very high. Engineers and lawyers and others, teachers, different level of professionalism where the stakes are a little bit different. And I think that we have seen time and time again the parallels between what it is about in the military and what it is about in healthcare, that has a lot to learn from each other. I don't think it's simply a one-way street. And on that line, it's not a one-way street. I think it would be great to begin to talk a little bit, or maybe a lot, about the LMX. And I need you to explain that to our listeners, and how you got into that and how that all ties together.
Absolutely. In the first chapter, I talk about behind enemy lines.
Mm-hmm.
We were a stone throws away from the most capable submarine, and we were surrounded by their fleet. And there was my executive officer who spoke up, and he changed the day where he prevented us from doing something. And that is the crux of this relationships, is that what gave him the power to do that when he had everything to lose, and it was so obvious that we should have taken a certain action. And if we did, we would have been a laughing stock of the submarine force if we were wrong. But if we were actually counter-detected, we could have got killed, and we would have been on the front page of USA Today. So there was so much at stake. But he spoke up, and he saved the day. And we were sitting around afterwards, after the mission was complete, and I went to him. I said, Gary, my executive officer, I said, why did you speak up? This was so obvious that we were counter-detected, but yet you saw something, a needle in a haystack, and you knew that that there could be a small chance that we weren't counter detected. And I said, it would have been so much easier for you to say nothing. And your reputation, your career, our safety was on the line. Why did you speak up? And you know what he said? He says, because you would have done it for me. That's the relationship. And we just had dinner 2 months ago. And he says, Bob, I want you to know. He says, as we reminisced about that time, he says, I would have never have spoke up on my previous command like that. He goes, there's no chance that I would ever spoke up. He says, that was what showed me it wasn't him. He wasn't from Mars. He wasn't unique. It wasn't me because I'm not anything special. But what it was the environment that was set. And that is building relationships. And you talk about psychological safety and all this other stuff. It's the same in healthcare. And I will tell you, it's exactly the same. So going to about LMX, and you want to...
Before we go to LMX, if I recall, as it was written in the book, you had made your decision.
Yeah.
You're the commanding officer. So, the buck stops with you for all intents and purposes. There's no higher ranking person in that sub at that moment. You don't get to call a friend like, who wants to win $1 million, call home and get advice. You have to make a decision. But what I recall from this story is that he influenced your decision making. If he detected there was a 1 in a million chance and he shared that thought, that and he articulated that with you, it entered into your calculus. And that is also a requirement of leadership, independent of the relationship. Listen to people, seek first to understand and then be understood, and remain curious at all times. Even if you make a decision, right or wrong, it is important that you listen to people. I hope that makes sense to you and to everybody else.
So, absolutely. And so I have seen, if you look at psychological safety in healthcare, right, 1 out of 4 will not speak up if they see something wrong. 50% won't speak up if someone of higher authority makes a decision, and 4 to 10 are afraid to speak up. I want to be very clear that our protocol, if we think we were counter detected, and if you look at it, you would ask 1 million submariners in that situation, they would have said you were counter detected, right?
And for the listeners, that means the other sub or surface ship has found you,
yes,
basically.
And what was at stake, this was on a mission vital to national security. The president himself authorized this mission. And we were behind, they had no idea we were there. And if they would have detected we were there, the possibilities were that they could have shot a torpedo at us. They could have tried to get us to surface. They wanted us to close the doors. We would have been trapped. And so our protocol, and again, if the cost of this was about $100 million. If you take the cost of the submarine, the cost of the crew, cost of the maintenance, this one event that we were watching was equivalent. It was about $100 million of taxpayer dollars, this one instance. And if you look at this, that all indications were they had us. And our protocol was to get out of there as soon as possible. Our protocol is if you think that you are counter detected, you brake, you go max speed, you launch all your countermeasures, you get out of there. And that is what we were trained. He went against that. He went against that odds. And not only that, if he was wrong and we did the deep dive and he made it worse, he would have never probably screened for command. And now, again, he's going to be potentially, I won't say it, but he's going to be potentially a 4-star admiral today. And he sacrificed all that. Why? And again, it wasn't me. It was because of that environment we set by building relationships. And that's what, it's not just building relationships, but how do you build relationships? What day-to-day practices will move the needle the most? And this is why I'm so excited to talk about leader-member exchange.
Well, let's hear about it. Let's hear about this exchange.
So I wrote the book because of that occurrence, because that is not taught. Building relationships, when I went through any leadership course, I teach leadership at the University of Central Florida. It doesn't teach you how to lead, like specifically day to day. It teaches you what leadership is. And so what I went to, I needed to find out more of this phenomenon. So I went to Rollins College and for my doctorate. and did not want to go. But I was influenced by Dr. Coleman, says, you need to go to this. And I said, Doc, I'm not going to school anymore. And so he pushed me. And that's one of the things about building relationships. You're there to professionally develop your team members, right? And whenever you help someone else, it always comes back 100-fold to be able to, do good for this world and you. So I went to Rollins College and I went to my first class. Did not want to do this. It was a check in the box. And I'm sitting in class and one of the instructor goes, professor goes, what is a theory? I said, I don't know, theory of relativity. And so he says, when the rooster crows, some guy said, I have a theory that the rooster's causing the sun to rise, right? And so he uses this as an example, right? Through statistical analysis, it shows that the rooster did not cause the sun to rise because sometimes the rooster crows, the sun didn't rise because it was cloudy, or the sun rose and the rooster wasn't crowing because it was busy doing other stuff. So through statistical analysis and significance shows that the rooster had no impact. And so he then assigned every single person in the class one legendary or significant theory, like the theory of relativity. It was assigned to one side. But the instructor comes to me and says, Bob, I want you to research leader-member exchange. And the founder of that leader-member exchange, his name is Dr. George Crane, right? And this is something like Paul McCartney in the academic world, right? He was just legendary. Oh. And I went home checking the box, like, I don't know what LMX is. I'm going back there and like, I don't want to write a paper.
You'd never heard this phrase before?
Never heard it before.
All right.
And so I went home and started researching it. And as I turned the page, started looking, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I did in command. And this brought academic rigor, proven research that showed what I did is why I was so successful. And it wasn't me, it was the relationships. And you look at Dr. Crane, for 50 years, he's an IO psychologist that has studied the human psyche or mental of what you do and how you interact with people. And building relationships shows that if you put 1 ounce in building a relationship compared to 1 ounce into yourself, your outcomes will go up 1,000-fold other than you put it in yourself, because it goes back to the engine. Your engine is not you. To err is human. You are going to make a mistake, and your greatest safety net isn't you. It's those people around you. So I emailed him. I said, oh my gosh, this is it. This explains my book. And I was in the middle of writing the book and I was about complete without having any LMX in there. And so I contacted him and Dr. Crane, and I sent him an email. He didn't respond to me. So 2 weeks later, I sent him another email. I put in, I was a submarine captain, and he calls me up again, annoyed, like he was annoyed that he, content, like, who's this? I got 20 other students wanting to talk to me. Like, what do you want, kid? And so he calls me on the phone and I said, I just want to let you know, I told him a little background. I'm going to send you my book. When he read my book and those things in that book, he calls me his heaven-sent apostle of leader-member exchange. He calls me his hero because my stories exactly brought his theory to life. And for the last 5 years, we created an academic curriculum together, practical playbooks to be able to from my book and others to show that if you do this, your outcomes will go up. So now it's building the leadership playbook. And when Dr. Crane just recently died about 10 months ago, he gave me his life's work. He gave me 2 notebooks of actually how I can carry on. He told his family and me he wants me to carry on his work. I want to teach people on the best things of if you want to improve your leadership skill, it's not about you. Yes, it's a portion of that. But if you really want to move the needle of leadership, it is about others.
Tell our listeners a couple of these elements about the how, and then we'll leave it to them to begin to explore this so that this can be shared.
Well, first of all, this goes back of my question. Why is this? Why are we teaching this? Why is this so unique? I mean, and I asked him that. I said, why aren't we teaching relationship? So if you look at his breakthrough article, and I saw it, is the #1 cited leadership quarterly article that has ever existed. And he is the #1 cited relationship leadership approach. And in 1995, he came out with this article called 25 Years of LMX. And it is a relationship approach to leadership. And as an IO psychologist, he goes all the way back to prehistoric era. If you look at the predominant leadership theory that has been taught for the last 2,000 years, it is the great man theory. And it is based off of the military, the Patton, the kamikazes. Do as you're told, take that hill. Don't challenge me. And you see this a lot in the medical industry because look at how doctors are trained, right? It's all, you go into residency, you got to protect it. You can't be vulnerable and you have to have all the answers. So I would say this opportunity, it's just wonderful. So what he says is that 1/3 of leadership is about you. And if you look at 80% of the articles today are written, 80% is about the leader, about how your communication, but he says the other 66% is about the people you lead. What do they like? What is their purpose in life? If you're not having somebody that just is a robot, you're going to get very limited out of that person. The other one is building relationships. Those three things. And if I look at a Microsoft calendar, most leaders are not skewed that way, right? I would say what I typically see is about 80% of their time during the day is about them. And so some practical tools and how you do this. And if you look, what is it exactly you do as a leader that builds relationships? And that's what we covered for 5 years. And I will tell you, one of those things is removing barriers and making people feel valued. That was the Crew Top 3. You can adopt this today. And if you look at McKinsey's article in 2021, they looked at 100,000 employees, 10 different countries, healthcare. The number one reason why people were leaving, especially not speaking up, was they didn't feel valued. That's what the Crew Top 3 does. So instead of saying, I value you, put things in place in your day-to-day schedule so that you can actually move the needle. That's Dr. Gray.
For those that are simply listening, and you can catch the entire interview on YouTube, my mind and my eyeballs and my facial expression is going in about 100 different directions because I'm thinking about the parallels in clinical training and how we learn how to assess our patient, and we ultimately are investing in our patient, giving them the right advice, the right diagnosis, the right treatment. And it is so applicable in leadership about investing in somebody and bringing out what is most important for them. And you amplify and you exemplify some great leadership opportunities here in listening to this. So you and I will have to talk more about this, and we certainly could talk for a few hours about all of this, but we only have a few minutes left. So I want to hit you with a couple really important questions before we wrap up. There's no doubt in my mind when I met you, when I've talked to you, and now again today, that relationships have been central throughout your life, your career trajectory, and your ongoing work today. And in healthcare, physicians and nurses have been very vocal about their frustrations with the system and the structure that surrounds all of their efforts, and many of them feel detached from their relationships at their direct management level and certainly at the senior management level. I wonder if you just have any quick insights about how leaders can meet those frustrations beyond Crew Top 3, beyond LMX, how to begin to repair some of that frustration.
So, and this is closing. And why are we talking about relationships today? Why was it so taken for granted? And I'll tell you that Harvard study just came out with the longest 85 years of a longitudinal study. And they looked at what makes people happy, live longer, and mentally and physically better off. And that study showed that it is relationships both at work and at home. And if you build relationships as a CMO, you're not only helping that individual live a better life, you're helping yourself live a better life. And why this is so important today is that if you look at the Earth has gone through these long status quos, then something triggers change. That triggering of change, our generation, is the digital revolution. In 1950s, the web came out, but then the smartphone. The smartphone is wonderful. If you think that AI is going to be the savior of all, I guarantee you it's like opening Pandora's box. If you can harness AI and to cure cancer, that's great. But right now, this is going to be our existential threat. Why? If you look at the World Health Organization, declared loneliness, the absence of human connection, to be a global epidemic. And this is equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day if you're lonely. And if you look at that, this is the most alarming thing, is that if you look at the Harvard study that showed what are the percentages of Americans that are lonely, it's 36%. But what is even more alarming, 61% of young adults report serious loneliness. because they're in this matrix, they're in this world where they have artificial connections. So if those companies or those CMOs that can harness the AI world, like building AI to be able to make more efficient, but at the same time, maintain that human connection, that is going to be the greatest competitive advantage to be able to live a wonderful life. And those are the companies that adopt that. And they only, using AI as the holy grail, those are the companies that are going to fail.
So to paraphrase, what I'm hearing is, in healthcare in particular, because I'm not versed in other industries, if healthcare leaders, including the CMOs and the CMIOs out there, if you can use AI to help people reconnect to each other,
Yes.
then you have accomplished something both meaningful for you and for the people that you serve. I think that's what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah. And AI is great for efficiency, but don't lose the human connection, because this generation needs you more than ever.
Yeah.
Because they don't know how to build relationships. They don't know how to interact with people. And so just don't ignore them, help them.
Yeah. I recently posted in a CMO only forum, what was the one thing no one ever told you would have made a difference when you started your job as a CMO? And unanimously, mentorship.
Yeah.
Every one of these, and they don't know each other, and they posted in this forum, the one thing that got me through, or the one thing I wish I had, or the one thing I wish the next person would have, is a mentor. And to your point about being disconnected in a digital world, the loss of mentorship is something that might be irreplaceable, and we have to find a way to force through that and to keep that going. All right, last question, sir. Really, it's a generic question. We have a lot of physicians and non-clinical administrative leaders listening to the show. Anything else you want to share that we didn't cover, especially the physicians that are leading their organizations?
So I'll leave you with this thought, right? I always ask the meaning of life, right? That's why I got on the nuclear.
The meaning of life.
Yeah, the meaning of life. Why are you on this earth, right? So when you get to the pearly gates, assume that you believe in a creator. Is that person going to ask you how much money you have in the bank, what car you drove, what house you have?
Well, I'll be disappointed if that's what they ask.
Yeah, well, I agree. But that's the perception out there that we're living day to day, right? And you can't turn back the time. I have found that whenever building relationships, and when you have this mindset that you're serving others, that is what's going to be graded, because we are dust to dust, ashes to ashes. We are such a short period of time on this earth. What's going to be eternal is our soul. And that soul, you're being measured on not what your wealth is or what your material positions are. You're being measured on what good that you can do for this world. Because I know that we're put on this earth for two reasons. One is to serve others, but we also have a unique purpose to do that. And it is a job of yourself to find what is that unique purpose, but it's also the job of a leader to help those that they serve to help find their purpose. And this is why these relationships are so important.
And it goes back to the beginning of the podcast. You must have, as a leader, the awareness of yourself in order to lead others and to bring value to the organization, and in this case, value to the world. I have to thank you for your service, for carrying the football, for getting underwater and getting subsurface and doing all those amazing things for national interest and national security, and for not allowing any accidents on any of your boats. I just a wonderful episode and wonderful time spent with you. And I could listen to these stories for hours, but I think our listeners probably have other things to do for the rest of the day. So thank you for being on the show, and thank you for sharing your energy and your passion. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the Chief Medical Officer. Want to learn more about the leader-member exchange and how to lead with love? Then reach out to this fine gentleman on my left, Dr. Navy Bob Ronska, on LinkedIn. If you want to learn more about your own physician leadership development and how to transform yourself and become a CMO, then contact me and I'll set you up with the CMO group and everything you need to learn in healthcare. I love talking with leaders from all over the world, and especially those from Lake Erie. So get out there, develop your people, develop your relationships, lead with love, and no matter what you do, please look out for yourself and be good to others out there. So long.